On a Tuesday morning in late October, at the corner of 5th and Maple in Ashford, Oregon, a woman named Renee Caldwell left her laptop bag on the bench outside the post office. She had set it down to check her phone. One message from her deputy, two from the Q commissioner, one from a number she didn't recognize. And when the bus wheezed to a stop at the curb and someone called her name from across the street, she walked toward the voice and forgot the bag entirely. The man who noticed it was sitting on the next bench over with a paper cup of coffee and a list of hardware store prices he was cross-referencing against what he had left in his account. His name was Garrett Hale, 43. He had a scar across the back of his left hand from a table saw he'd been careless with in 2019, and he wore the same canvas jacket most days because it had enough pockets. He looked at the bag. He looked at the woman disappearing around the corner. He picked up the bag, finished his coffee, walked to the post office window, and asked if anyone had come in looking for it. No one had. He waited 12 minutes. Then he carried it to the county administrative building on Broad Street and left it at the front desk with his name and number on a notepad page. He did not stay to be thanked. Renee didn't get the call until 2 in the afternoon. She was in the middle of a budget review when her assistant knocked and said a man named Garrett Hale had turned in her bag at the front desk. She had not even realized it was gone. She checked. Everything was there. The laptop, the external drive, the folder with the Ridgecrest School District audit she had been working on for 6 weeks. All of it. She asked the desk clerk to describe him. Canvas jacket, the clerk said. Quiet. He didn't ask for anything. Renee went back to her office and closed the door. She set the bag on her desk and opened it again, the way you do when you need to confirm something is real. The external drive caught her eye first. It held 3 months of financial records for the county's infrastructure fund. If someone had copied what was on it, they would have known exactly what she was looking at. She turned it over in her hand. There were no marks on it, no sign it had been opened. She had a meeting in 20 minutes. She set the drive down, went to the meeting, and spent the next hour and a half saying words she couldn't remember afterward. That evening she pulled the security footage from the bench camera on 5th and Maple. There he was. He sat still for a while after she left. He picked up the bag, held it in both hands, looked around once. Then he walked to the post office and disappeared inside. She fast-forwarded. 12 minutes later he came out, walked 2 blocks to Broad Street, went through the front door of the county building. He was inside for 4 minutes. When he came out, his hands were empty and he was reading the hardware list again. She asked her assistant to run the name, Garrett Hale, Ashford, Oregon. No county vendor. No prior contact with the office. She found a business listing, Hale General Repair, residential and commercial, licensed, no website, phone number only. Established 2021. She did not call the number. Not yet. She drove home along the river road, thinking about a man who had found a bag containing what could have been leverage and had carried it 12 blocks to return it without leaving anything behind, except a name on a notepad. She thought about that for 3 days. On the 4th day, she drove to the address attached to the business listing. It was a house on the east side of Ashford where the roads turned to gravel and the neighbors kept their firewood stacked in long, neat rows against their fences. A small yellow house, a rusted wind chime on the porch. In the driveway, a boy of about 11 was shooting free throws at a hoop mounted above the garage. He missed, retrieved the ball, shot again. Garrett was not there. He was 2 houses down on a ladder, recalking the upper window frame of an elderly neighbor's house. He looked down when her car stopped, recognized her the way people recognize someone they have seen once and expected never to see again. His face didn't change much. He came down the ladder slowly. Renee got out of the car with a plain envelope. She held it out at the edge of the driveway. "Thank you for the bag," she said. $200. "It isn't a reward, just acknowledgement." He looked at the envelope. He did not take it. "I didn't lose anything returning it," he said. His voice was level and unhurried, the way some people get when they've learned not to spend energy on things that don't require it. She stood there a moment with the envelope still in her hand. The boy down the road had stopped shooting. He was watching them over the top of the garage door. She put the envelope back in her coat. "Thank you," she said again, meaning it differently this time. She got back in her car. Garrett went back up the ladder. She sat behind the wheel for longer than she needed to before she started the engine. A man who recalked his neighbor's window on his own time. A man who wouldn't take $200 for returning something that was worth considerably more than that. There was a logic to it she kept returning to, and she couldn't explain it by any of the usual categories. She told herself she was done thinking about it. She was not done. The audit was the reason she couldn't let it go, or that was what she told herself. 6 weeks of tracing the county's infrastructure fund had led her to a set of disbursements that did not add up. The contractor receiving them, Ridgecrest Capital Partners, appeared in the county vendor system with a registration date 8 months ago and no prior work history. The amounts were not enormous individually. Together they were substantial, and the approval signatures on every single one of them belonged to Deputy Commissioner Paul Staver. Paul Staver had been in county government for 14 years. He had been her father's ally when her father held the office before her. He brought muffins to staff birthdays. He was patient and genial, and he had been quietly steering contracts to a entity she could not find in any state business registry. She kept the folder in a locked drawer. She told no one. 2 weeks after the bag incident, she drove past Hale General Repair on a Thursday evening and saw the light on in the garage. She parked. She was not entirely sure why. She knocked on the side door. Garrett opened it with a soldering iron in one hand and a pair of safety glasses pushed up on his forehead. The boy from the driveway was at a work table behind him gluing something together with focused concentration. He was thin and dark-haired, with a small gap between his front teeth that made him look younger than he probably was. Renee said she was sorry to interrupt. Garrett said she wasn't interrupting and held the door open. The boy looked up. "Who's she?" he said. "She's someone I returned a bag to," Garrett said. The boy considered this with the gravity of someone evaluating a math problem. He went back to his gluing. His name was Kobe. She found this out at dinner, which she was invited to with the same lack of ceremony, as if she had stopped by every week for a year. Soup, bread, a jar of hot sauce on the table that Kobe used on everything. He talked through most of the meal. He was telling them about a thing that had happened at school, involving a substitute teacher and a misidentified bird species, and he told it with great precision, doubling back to correct himself on minor details, which Garrett listened to with his full attention. "My dad was in the Navy," Kobe said at some point, addressing Renee directly as if they had already established terms of conversation. "He was on a ship. A big one. He worked in the engine room. Machinery," Garrett said. He didn't elaborate. "He's really good at fixing things," Kobe continued. "He fixed the Henderson's boiler last winter, and they didn't have any money, so he just said forget it." Garrett looked at his soup. Renee looked at Garrett. After dinner, Kobe washed his bowl and disappeared upstairs. Garrett poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted any. The kitchen was clean and simply arranged. A corkboard on the wall with a school calendar, a permission slip, a photograph of a woman standing in front of a Douglas fir. The woman was laughing, her head tilted back, one hand raised to shade her eyes. Renee looked at the photograph without meaning to. She looked away. She drove home and sat in her car in the driveway for a while. Then she went inside and opened the audit folder. The next morning she asked her office manager, a woman named Dorothea, who had worked at the county building for 19 years, to pull every disbursement made to Ridgecrest Capital Partners since the vendor account was opened. Dorothea's hand paused over the keyboard for just a moment before she typed the request. That pause lasted less than 2 seconds. Renee noted it. The records arrived on her desk by noon. She stayed late to read them. The total disbursed in 8 months was $212,000. The invoices were vague in their language: project coordination services, regional infrastructure consulting, feasibility assessment phase 1, and none of them were attached to a specific project number. She spread them across her desk and looked at them the way you look at a thing when you know it's wrong, but need to find the exact place where it breaks. She called Garrett from her car in the parking structure. It was 9:40 in the evening. He answered on the second ring. She said she had a question that wasn't personal. He said, "Go ahead. If a county vendor account is opened and receives $200,000 in payments over 8 months with no project numbers attached to any of the invoices," she said, "what would that tell you?" He didn't answer immediately. She heard a small sound in the background that might have been a television being turned off. "It tells me the invoices are a surface," he said. "The payments are going somewhere else." "What's the vendor category?" "Infrastructure consulting." He was quiet a moment longer. "Who approved the account?" She didn't answer. She heard him understand that. Who set up the vendor system at your county? He said. She thought about it, 5 years ago. Under the previous commissioner, he said, that's where I'd start. She sat in the parking structure for a while after the call ended. The concrete around her ticked with the cold. A car pulled in 2 levels below, and the sound of its door echoed up. She drove home on the long way, through the dark river road, and didn't turn on the radio. She went back to the yellow house the following Sunday, not for a reason she could name. Kobe was in the backyard, throwing a tennis ball against the fence and catching it. He waved at her the way you wave at someone who has been coming around long enough to wave at. Garrett was inside at the kitchen table going through a binder. He looked up, moved the binder to make room, poured coffee. She sat down. There was a school project spread across one end of the table, a hand-drawn map of an imaginary country neatly labeled in pencil. 3 mountain ranges, a river with a name she couldn't read from where she sat, cities marked with small stars. Kobe does that, Garrett said, following her eyes. He makes maps. His mother used to read him fantasy novels. He started drawing the places in them, and then he started making up his own. Where is she? Renee asked. Garrett looked at the map for a moment. She passed away. About 2 years ago. It was her heart. She was 37. He said it the way someone says a thing they have said enough times to carry without it breaking them. But his thumb moved once against the edge of the binder. I'm sorry, Renee said. He nodded. He didn't say it was fine. She respected that. Outside, the tennis ball hit the fence and hit it again. The rhythm of it was even and patient. The following week, Renee found Dorothea in the break room at 7:40 in the morning, which was unusual. Dorothea arrived at 8:15 every day, had for 19 years. She asked Dorothea if she was all right. Dorothea set her cup down and said, I have to ask you something. Renee waited. Is this about Ridgecrest? Yes, Renee said. Dorothea picked up her cup again. She held it with both hands without drinking from it. My husband, she said, found something in 2022. He was doing a contract audit for the state. He flagged it internally. 3 weeks later, his contract wasn't renewed. She paused. He's been working for a private firm in Portland since then. He doesn't talk about any of it. He told me once, don't dig where I dug, Dorothea, and I haven't. She looked at Renee. I'm telling you this because I think you're already digging. Renee said yes, she was. Dorothea nodded slowly. She picked up her cup and walked out of the break room. That night Renee drove south. The road to Garrett's house was easy now, the turns automatic. He was on the porch. Kobe's light was already off upstairs. She sat down in the other chair and told him about Dorothea, about the husband. About the contract, she told him about a man she had found in the county vendor registry. A name attached to Ridgecrest Capital Partners that also appeared on a state lobbying disclosure from 4 years ago. A man named Trent Calloway, who had been a senior aide to the previous commissioner, who was currently running a real estate development group in Salem, who had been photographed at Paul Staver's retirement party the year Staver was reappointed. Garrett listened to all of it. When she finished, he looked at the dark yard. You found the connection, he said. Now you need someone who can verify it independently before Staver knows you're looking. She said, I need someone whose name isn't in our system. Not a vendor, not a contractor, nothing on file. He turned his head toward her. She did not say it directly. She left it there between them like a question that was also a door. He looked at his hands. He was quiet for so longer than she expected. This isn't just your foundation, he said. This is public money, school money, road money, people's taxes. He said it like he was reading something off a wall he had been looking at for a while. Then he said, I can help you verify the Calloway connection. I know how to pull state disclosure records. I know what shell structures look like. How do you know that? She said. He was quiet a moment. I spent 6 years watching people move money to places they shouldn't. Navy intelligence liaison, the last 2 deployments. I know what the seams look like. She looked at him. He had not told her that before. He said, I left because Kobe was 8 and he needed a father who came home every night. Not because the work stopped mattering. She did not say anything. She looked at the dark yard, where the fence was straight and even, and she knew he had built it himself. They worked through the records over the next 4 evenings. He came to the county building once, after hours with a visitor's badge she had arranged, and they went through 3 years of vendor activity, side by side at the conference table. He moved through financial documents the way he moved through everything else. Without hurry, without wasted motion, pulling out the threads that mattered and setting the rest aside. On the third evening, he found it, a routing number on a 2021 transfer that traced back to a trust account registered in Nevada. The trust's registered agent was Trent Calloway's brother-in-law. The money had moved from the county to Ridgecrest to the trust to a set of political action committee contributions in 4 state races. 2 of the candidates had won. Both had voted against an infrastructure transparency bill 2 sessions later. Garrett sat back and looked at the screen for a moment. "This isn't just Staver," he said. "He's the local mechanism. This is bigger." She already knew. She had known for a few days. She hadn't wanted to say it out loud until someone else saw it too. She called the state attorney general's office the next morning. She was transferred twice, before she reached an investigator named Hartley, who listened without speaking for a long time, and then said he would call her back within 24 hours. He called back in 11. What happened next moved both slowly and all at once the way these things do. The Attorney General's office requested 30 days to build the parallel case before any action. Renee agreed. She told no one at the county office. She changed the lock on the drawer where she kept the audit folder. On the 22nd day, she came out of a meeting to find that her assistant had left a message. Paul Staver had called a staff meeting for the following morning. Topic listed as administrative restructuring. She stood in the hallway with the message slip in her hand and knew what it meant. He had found out, or someone had told him, she was close. Administrative restructuring was how you made a problem smaller before it became public. She called Garrett from the parking lot. He said, "How fast can you get the physical documentation to someone outside your office?" She said, "Tonight." He said, "Do it tonight. Don't go home after." She drove to his house at 9. She had a folder and a hard drive and a USB with the scanned originals. She sat in the kitchen while Kobe slept upstairs, and Garrett made 2 phone calls she partly listened to and partly didn't. One was to someone he called Webb. One was to the Hartley investigator directly. He spoke to both of them the same way, plainly, without urgency in his voice, though she could hear the urgency underneath it the way you feel cold air under a door. Hartley moved the timeline up. At 6 the next morning, Renee got a call from a number she didn't recognize. A woman's voice. She identified herself as a senior investigator with the AG's office. She asked Renee to come in that morning and bring whatever she had. Renee was in her car in 3 minutes. She called Garrett on the way. He said, "I'll get Kobe to school and meet you there." She said, "You don't have to." He said, "I know." The AG's office was in Salem, 90 minutes south. They arrived within 12 minutes of each other. The senior investigator was a woman named Carla Muth, who had the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to have stopped being surprised by any of it. She went through Renee's materials methodically. She asked 15 questions. She made 3 calls while they waited in a side room. When she came back, she said, "We're moving today." Paul Staver was taken into custody at the county building at 2 in the afternoon. The arrest was quiet, no cameras, no statement, just 2 state agents at his office door and a brief conversation in the hallway. Renee was not there. She was in Salem in a conference room, giving a recorded statement. Trent Calloway was picked up in Portland by evening. 3 other county officials were placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Dorothea learned about it from the news that night. She called Renee and said only, "Thank you." Her voice was steady, but she said it twice. Renee sat in her kitchen and looked at nothing for a while. She drove south the next evening. She needed to. She didn't examine why. Garrett was in the driveway when she pulled up. He had a flashlight and a socket set, and the hood of an old truck propped open. Kobe was beside him, handing him tools in the sequence they had apparently already worked out, which suggested this was not the first time they had done this together. Kobe looked up when she got out of her car. He seemed unsurprised by her presence. He said, "Did they actually arrest him?" She said yes. He thought about this. "Good," he said. He handed his father a wrench. They had dinner again. Same kitchen, same light. Garrett made eggs and toast, and Kobe put hot sauce on everything, and talked about a book he was reading, in which a cartographer discovered a country that didn't appear on any official map, and had to decide whether to report it. "Do you think she should tell?" he asked Renee directly. "I think she already knows she has to," Renee said. "She just hasn't gotten there yet." Kobe considered this seriously, and nodded once and went back to his food. After dinner, Kobe went upstairs and they heard him moving around up there, the familiar architecture of a child's nighttime routine. Garrett washed the dishes. Renee dried them without being asked because the dish towel was on the counter and it seemed like the obvious thing to do. When the kitchen was clean, they sat on the porch. The night was cold and clear. The stars over Ashford were the kind you only got in small towns, dense and unhurried. She looked at the corkboard photograph through the kitchen window, the woman in front of the Douglas fir laughing. "What was her name?" Renee said. "Sandra," he said. He said it simply. He did not look away from the yard. "She was looking at the stars that night in the photo," he said. "We'd taken Kobe camping and she was trying to teach him the constellations. She didn't actually know very many of them. She just made up the names and told him the real ones would come to him eventually." Renee looked at the dark above the tree line. "She sounds like someone who knew what mattered," she said. He looked at the yard a moment longer. Then he said, "Yes, she did." The porch light was a thin yellow that didn't reach far. The wind moved through the Douglas firs at the property edge. They sat in it. She did not stay much longer. She stood when the cold had settled in enough to feel it. He stood too. He walked her to the edge of the steps, not to her car, just to the steps. "Drive safe," he said. She nodded. She went down to her car. She got in and looked once at the lighted kitchen window before she started the engine. She drove home on the long way. 4 days later, Kobe knocked on the front door of the county administrative building for the first time. He had his backpack on and a permission slip in one hand, and a question about whether the county kept historical maps that the public could look at. The clerk told him yes. She called Renee. Renee came down from her office. Kobe was at the display case in the lobby looking at a 1947 survey map of the valley. He didn't look up when she stopped beside him. "Did your dad send you?" she said. "No," he said. "He doesn't know I'm here. I had a half day." She looked at the map with him. He pointed out where the river had changed course since 1947 and explained accurately why rivers do that. She took him to the archive room and showed him the full collection. He spent 2 hours there. She checked on him twice. Both times he was so absorbed in what he was looking at that he acknowledged her with only a small noise and went back to the maps. When she came down at 4, he was packing up his bag. He said the maps were incredible, and he wanted to come back. She said he could. At the door he stopped and turned around. "My dad talks about what's right a lot," he said. "Not like a lecture, just as a fact, like it's just how things work." He said it in the tone of someone reporting an observation. Then he nodded once and pushed through the door. She stood in the lobby for a moment. Then she went back upstairs to finish the work. 3 months passed. The county restructured the vendor approval process. A new independent auditor was contracted. Dorothea's husband sent a brief email thanking Renee. He had heard through channels. He signed it with only his first name, Edward. She replied the same way. On a Saturday in March, the rain had stopped, and the light over Ashford was pale and bright the way it got in the northwest when the clouds finally thinned. Renee drove south without thinking very much about why. Garrett was on the porch with 2 cups of coffee already on the small table. She had not told him she was coming. She stopped at the foot of the steps. He had set out 2 cups. She looked at them. "Kobe is in there," he said. "He's finishing a map of a country where all the rivers run north. He started it last week." She came up the steps and sat down. They drank their coffee. The yard was still wet from the rain. A pair of birds moved through the birch tree at the fence line and disappeared. She had brought a folder. A grant proposal she was working on for a rural infrastructure transparency program, a pilot she wanted to run in 3 counties. She set it on the table. "I'd like your input on the field model," she said. "You know what works and what doesn't better than anyone I'd hire." He picked up the proposal. He read the first page without speaking. Then the second. He set it down. "You'd be starting in October? If we get the grant." "Yes." He picked up his coffee. He looked at the wet yard and the birds in the birch tree and the light that was still coming through. "I can look at this," he said. The screen door opened behind them. Kobe came out in his socks and his Saturday clothes and stopped when he saw Renee. He looked at the 2 of them sitting in the chairs. He looked at the folder on the table. He seemed to weigh this. "Is she staying for lunch?" he said. Garrett looked at Renee. Renee said, "If that's all right." Kobe went back inside, and the sound of cabinet doors meant he was already deciding what they were having. Garrett picked up the proposal again. He read the 3rd page. His coffee sat beside him, going cool. He turned a page and kept reading. Renee looked at the yard and the light on the wet grass and the pale sky above the Douglas firs. She had not come looking for any of this. That was still the only part that made sense to her. His hand was on the armrest between them. She had not put her hand over his. She was looking at the yard. He was reading the proposal. At some point in the next few minutes one of those things would change or neither of them would, and both of those outcomes seemed to her exactly right. Inside, a cabinet closed. A pot hit a burner. The smell of butter reached the porch. The light over Ashford was the kind that happened only for an hour on mornings like this, pale and even, and without shadow, and it lay across the wet yard like something given freely, not asked for and not taken. Just there.